Thanks very much. This is a fantastic conference. I really appreciate being here. I'm going to talk to you today about norms, identity, and Nash equilibrium. And it is, in some sense, understanding one particular use of Nash equilibrium in economics and social sciences more generally. So let's think about what social norms are. And I should thank Johnny. Where are you in the room? There you are. So wonderful that he's helped me a lot because he's introduced you, I think, to this area in the previous talk. So what are social norms? So some examples that we can think about are social interactions. What is the appropriate and inappropriate behavior of people as we're going around in our lives? So we can think about how we dress, what language we use, and not just what language as in French or English, but what register of the language we use, the humor we use, and so on. I love it that when I've been at Oxford, I always get a dress code of what I'm supposed to wear, right? And then I had to Google what is smart dress code, because it's like, and then when I did that, I got all this stuff for men. I'm like, okay, so what is smart dress code for women? I'm okay, this is what's in my suitcase. I'm just going to deal with it. But you understand that it's part of what we think of as social norms. Of course, they're really wide-ranging and very consequential. So family practices, how do people meet their spouse? What are marriage customs, child-rearing customs, social relations within families, and at work? Do you show up on time? Is it important to show up on time? Do you hire family members or not? Is there deference at work? Who do you treat as your superior? How do you act towards them? The effort that you do on the job. Now, of course, we know that there's incentives behind all of these things, but also there are norms for how we should be behaving at work. Let's take a look at Webster's Dictionary of Social Norms. A widespread or usual practice, procedure, or custom. Okay? Furthermore, a principle of right action binding upon the members of a group and serving to guide, control, or regulate proper and acceptable behavior. So I'm going to dissect this as I go along. So that's what Webster says. What does ChatGPT say? Shared rules or behavioral expectations within a group or society that prescribe or proscribe certain actions sustained by social approval and disapproval. So you can see that we're starting to get into a game here, right? And when I was looking at these definitions, especially when you do ChatGPT, you saw that there was somehow this interaction between the literature I know in the social sciences on social norms and the definitions they give you. So somehow social norms, actually one of the definitions, I couldn't repeat it. I couldn't get it again on ChatGPT. Couldn't reproduce the same thing. It literally said an equilibrium set of behaviors. So that's what I'm going to talk to you about today, as well as present a little bit of, maybe most of the talk will actually be about some of my new work. But I'm also going to give you an overview of how economists have been looking at social norms. So what is the meta goal of research on norms in economics? So some of you may disagree with this, but I'm going to say the meta goal of research on norms in economics is to understand why people tend to do what other people do. So we saw the picture of everyone wearing a mask. Why do people tend to do what other people do? And how does a norm emerge? And that was also in the previous talk. And how is it sustained? And one of the things that economists want to understand is how a norm emerges and is sustained even when it's inefficient, even when it's bad for everyone, and yet everyone still does it. So this is, I think, sort of the meta question. And in these economic models, people act, they do the best for themselves, anticipating, taking into account what others are thinking and doing. And when everybody does this, and everybody's expectations are correct, that's a norm. Okay, and what does that sound like? In reduced form, sounds like a Nash equilibrium in reduced form. So there's literally use of Nash equilibrium, but overall, I think the way we understand norms is, in some sense, how I would teach a Nash equilibrium to my undergraduates. It's what we do, what I expect everyone to do. When everyone does what everyone expects everyone to do, we have a norm. It's a Nash equilibrium. So what I'm going to try to do today is give you a whirlwind view of the theoretical work in economics on social norms, and then spend most of my time on a project that I have with Francis Bloch that considers bringing social identity to the basic theory of norms. So this is another set of research which I work on, is the notion of social identity. That's who we are, how we think of ourselves, and how that influences our behavior. And why I think that's important is because groups and identity, if we think about what that means, that the actions I may be taking are personally meaningful. So when I think about my religious practices or my cultural practices or political expressions, that is part of who I am, and it may be different from how you think about your culture, your religion, and your practices. So we want to bring groups and identities into the study of social norms. So let me now go back to those definitions and show you where these things show up. Here is the definition, a principle of a right action binding upon members of a group. Right? This is the Webster definition. So it's the right action binding on members of group. Share rules or behavioral expectations within a group or society that prescribe or proscribe certain actions. So the definitions have these notions of groups and right and incorrect actions, right or not right actions, and yet the theory that I'm going to give you the whirlwind tour of has not really taken that yet into account as much as I think it could. So the question that I'm going to talk to you about is what happens when people in different groups with different notions of the right action interact with each other. It's not like we all think something's right. We disagree on what we think is the correct thing to do. And this is the work on Française that I'll be showing you later. So that's today's presentation. So what I will do first is give you that whirlwind tour. So that's the first thing, is a brief overview of the theoretical work in economics on social norms. So here's our tour. And Johnny's did half of it already. So the first bullet point there is about coordination and conventions. So the idea here, if you think of a coordination game, and people want to do the same thing, it's just they don't know what everybody else is doing, and so they are trying to figure that out. And the way this has been modeled, which again Johnny went through very clearly, one way it's been modeled very successfully is that there's some evolutionary dynamics where people eventually, they locally learn and then it spreads through the population and then eventually the population converges on a particular action. So of course Peyton, where's Peyton? Peyton is of course the major contributor to this work. And I've listed some other folks up there as well. So ultimately a single action emerges. There's another literature on norms, and they actually call it norms rather than conventions, is in a repeated game context. And this literature, I think, is doing the explaining of how a norm or an action can emerge even when it is inefficient. So imagine there's a repeated game, and there's a stage game, and then there's a repeated. This stage game is repeated. There's some actions. If everybody were to, well, I guess the prisoner's dilemma would be a classic here. If you don't take a certain action, then you get punished. And if you don't punish the person that takes that certain action, you get punished, and so on and so forth. So a repeated interaction can sustain a norm, can sustain an action, even though it is bad for everyone. And so, of course, George Akerlof has this paper on castes, and even though it's not a repeated game, it's not written in a repeated game, it's essentially what it is. Okay, and so here's where we have what was mentioned, female genital mutilation as a norm that persists, even though it's bad for everyone. So that is another way in which economists model norms is through this repeated games. Another set of papers it models this word. Now the word is conformity, right? You see, these are all synonyms in some sense. So conformity is modeled as a signaling game, and so here are some of the contributors. Of course, Jean-Paul is here. So I think it started with Bernheim's paper. The idea is that so what are people's preferences here? I'm now a person in the game. I care about what you think about me. So I care about my reputation in terms of what you think my type is. So I want you to think I'm generous, okay? And so in order for you to think I'm generous, I may take certain actions which signal that I'm generous. So you get these separating equilibria, and those who take certain actions, the inference is they are of a certain type, okay? So that's how these games work. So the conformity literature is based on a signaling game, and people care about what others think about them. Okay? Now, this is a growing literature. There's a new paper by Jantschgi where the signals of the underlying types could be, it's not necessarily agreed upon as a particular type is a good type to have. So if I could be progressive, or I could be liberal, or I could be conservative, those might be the types. And I'm concerned that you think of me as one of these types, but it's not agreed upon, like in contrast to generosity, as which is the good type to have. Okay, so you're starting to introduce the notion that there's different types of people. But it's a signaling game. What the people care about in this paper is what others think of them. And then this goes on, as you can imagine, to work on self-censoring and political correctness. So I act in certain ways, so you have a particular view of who I am. Okay. So that's the whirlwind tour. And you might ask, in all of this, what more is there to do? And here's what I think we should be doing, or one thing that we could be doing here, which is that, one, is that I don't care about what you think of me, right? All I care about is when we interact, what we do, right? So I don't care really directly. I don't care directly about what you think of me. The only way I care about what you think of me is because I care how you're going to act towards me. I don't really care. So I just care about what people do, okay? And there's different notions of what the right action is, not the different types. It's just the right action. And then the next bullet point is, I think, even more fundamental, is that in all of these models which I've mentioned, people can't adjust their actions according to whom they meet. So this, and Johnny, you sort of, there was a little line when you said, and we just assume that people adopt the same action all the time. In the real life, we adjust what we do depending on who you meet. You meet one person, you might use a different kind of humor than when you meet another person, for example. Okay? I might wear certain clothes at a conference and different clothes in the evening, and so on. So I want people to be able to adjust their actions according to whom they meet. So this is a project with Francis Bloch, who many of you might know, and we've been working it for a bit of time. And I'd like to present to you our ideas here. And what we're trying to understand is what happens when people want to align their behavior, but they have different identities. They have different notions of what the right action is. And let me give you some examples. So just to sort of fix ideas. Should you discuss politics with a random person in the checkout line at a grocery store? Depends on where you live, depends on what you see, right? It's not clear what you should be doing, right? Should you discuss your religious beliefs and politics at work? I don't know, okay, you're getting the idea, right? Should you talk about your spouse or your family at work? Depending on your family composition, you'd be more or less reticent to do so. But of course, reticent to do so is already saying that there's a majority that has a particular family composition, and your family composition does not match that. So there is a motive to align actions with others. People per se, we like to get along with each other, we like to conform. There are spillovers from doing so. So at work, if we chit-chat about football over lunch, we may work better when we're collaborating on a project, for example. Even though somebody might hate football, they might have to feel like they need to follow football. But even though there are these benefits, taking these actions can be more or less aversive. So people may feel inauthentic when they're doing so. So just to say that this is a real problem and real issues, because I tend to work on what I think of real problems and real issues. This is a Wharton blog. Can't be yourself at work? Let's talk about covering. So the idea is people at work they're going to act like other people. They're not going to act like themselves. Here is another one from perhaps our own profession. Faculty say they're self-censoring, so people don't talk about certain things in their classes and at work. Okay. All right. So the questions we're going to examine are when do the preferences of the majority prevail, and when do people accommodate the minority. So I'm going to give you an outline of a simple model. So the way we do the talk here, I'm going to give you the outline of the simple model, a little bit of the intuition of the results, and then get into the guts of the model. So the simple model, there's going to be two actions, red and green. There are two sets of agents who are red and green, and they each have preferences over the actions that correspond, of course. The agents randomly meet. Agents want to match the action with others, but they have these inauthenticity costs. So if I'm red and I act green, it's inauthentic, and I feel bad about that. I'm going to give you two cases today. One is where there's incomplete information. When the two players meet, they don't know anything about the other player. They don't know their type or their inauthenticity cost. And then there's another setting which I'd like to talk about. It's a two-stage game, where in the first stage, the agents commit to one of the actions. Or, and this is the key thing, they can choose to remain flexible and decide what they do contingent on the person that they meet, on what the other person has chosen to do. So again, just to fix ideas, so suppose I was talking about whether you discuss religious observance or not at work, right? You could wear a religious symbol to work, and that's a kind of commitment. Or you could not. And that allows you to adjust your behavior given whom you've met. If you want to express conservative or progressive views, well, you could wear a T-shirt or a particular hat, or you might wear a suit and tie versus T-shirts and jeans. Or you could have stickers on the back of your computer. So students love stickers on their computer. You may notice that in libraries. This one doesn't have one. Or you could be business casual and decide to interact and choose an action depending on who you meet. So I just wanted to just sort of give you some sense of how these are real issues that people deal with sort of every day. All right, so a summary of the results, because this is what we do in economics, is I tell you the punchline, and then I get into the guts of the model. So a little bit of the results or the insights that we get. So this is the incomplete information setting. So the incomplete information setting is where people meet. They just don't know who they're meeting, right? They don't know their type. They don't know their color. They don't know, there's no commitment, none of that. There is a unique equilibrium, which is a tyranny of the majority. Again, given the assumptions we made on our model, and we'll get to that. So what's happening here is the minority with very low inauthenticity costs. What are they going to do? They're going to choose the majority action, which gives greater incentives for the other people in the minority to take the majority action. So you get these strategic complementarities among the minority to do what the majority does. On the two-stage game, where we have this commitment versus flexibility in the first stage, and then these meetings in the second stage, there's two stable equilibria. In these equilibria, the people with the highest costs, the highest inauthenticity costs, they commit. They wear the T-shirt, or they wear the religious symbol. The people who remain flexible accommodate those who commit. In some sense, they don't care. Why not? I'll just, I'll go along with whatever you're doing. And the flexible people could be playing one or the other action with each other. Now, who is better off or worse off with this commitment? In some sense, you might think everyone should be better off with commitment. And it's true for almost everybody. The minority and the low-cost majority are always better off when the commitment possibility is there. However, it's not really good for the high-cost majority. The high-cost majority loves the world where everybody does what their preferred action. That's their heaven. And when the commitment is possible, it means that more people are not going to be doing their preferred action. And so I think we can see how you can get these possibilities where the people in the majority who have very high costs of doing the other action basically want everybody else not to show who they are. And that's I think the intuition we may be getting from this model. Okay, so now I'm going to get into the guts of it. I have 20 minutes, right? No, 15. Perfect, okay. So here's the model. Where am I? Okay, there's a continuum of agents with mass 1. each agent is either green or red. A proportion gamma, bigger than a half, are green. There's a matching colors game. That's what we call our game. It's a matching colors game between two agents. The agents meet at random, and they simultaneously choose green or red. Each earns a benefit of B if they choose the same color. They earn 0 if they don't choose the same color. Each player has an individual cost C of choosing the color that does not correspond to their type. And we're calling this an inauthenticity cost. So if I'm red and I act green, I have a cost C, right, because I'm being inauthentic to who I am. And we're just saying the C is uniformly distributed on 0, 1. Okay? So we're going to do the incomplete information matching colors game. So I'm going to analyze that game first, incomplete information matching colors game. And I'm going to be looking for a Bayesian Nash equilibrium. And the Bayesian Nash equilibrium is going to consist of a strategy G or R, green or red, for each type cost. So a green person with a particular cost or a red person particular cost. So here is our mass of agents. And what I want to do is fill this in for the play of each part of our square here. Okay. So just some notation. We have these little pi g as the benefits of playing green, little pi r as the benefits of playing r. And the preliminary is simply that anyone who has a cost above b plays their own color because it's a dominant strategy. Okay, so these people play their own color. The people with a cost b, above a cost b, they play their own color. The equilibrium is then characterized by threshold costs, which we're labeling CG and CR, which give us the cutoff point between those who continue to play, those who play green and those who play R for the green players. And on the other side, those who play red and those who play green. Oh, I should have mentioned here we see the division of the population. The greens are the majority. Gamma green majority. Okay, so the equilibrium is characterized by these threshold costs. So let's take a look. We know the equilibrium is going to look something like this. The next thing we want to do is pin down the CG and CR. And the greens, what we can get from these is if the greens are playing red, it must mean that playing red is bigger than their cost, rather. And if the reds play green, it must mean that playing green is bigger than the cost, which of course can't happen simultaneously. So you can't have these people playing red and these people playing green. It's not possible for that to exist in equilibrium. So either one of them is playing the zero, so you can think about it as the zero cost player is either playing their own color or not. So the equilibria either have this form or this form. Okay? So those are the two possibilities of the equilibria. All right? And to find the equilibrium, we simply look for the fixed point. And our proposition here is if gamma is bigger than a half, we have a unique Bayesian Nash equilibrium, which is the tyranny of the majority. So let me just do the little pictures. So we look for a fixed point for each of the two possible equilibria, which I showed you previously. So we take a look at the payoffs. And for CG equals 0, we set pi r equals pi g minus CR, right, which will give us this particular CR that I have up there. And this, as I'm calling this, the tyranny of the majority, because what's happening here is that we've got these people who are reds who are playing green. And the more the dynamics, of course, this is a simultaneous move game, but if you look at the best replies, the more people who are reds who are playing green, the greater incentive for other reds to be playing green until we get to this particular cutoff. Okay? If we take a look at this possibility, because greens are the majority, there is no interior solution to CG. Okay? So this is not an equilibrium. So the unique equilibrium is the one I've written up here. Again, I'm just writing it again, is the equilibrium I'm displaying to you here. Again, I want to emphasize that what's going on in this is there's strategic complementarities among the reds who are playing green. Okay, when the more reds play green, more reds also want to play green. And the other is that this cutoff point is increasing in gamma and approaches B. So of course, the more and more greens there are in the population, the higher is this cutoff cost, right? And so as you approach gamma equals 1, all of the reds are playing green except those whose costs are really high. Okay. So this gives us the tyranny of the majority outcome. Now you think that these reds are kind of in bad shape here. These guys, you know, these people are sort of mismatching a lot. These reds here, they're playing red, but they're meeting mostly greens, so they're actually not earning much. So you might think, is there some way out of this tyranny of majority outcome? And that's where I'm going to introduce the idea that people could possibly commit to their color, right? So rather than meet and have no information whatsoever about the other color, about their partner, we're going to introduce a two-stage game. And then two-stage game, the first stage is when the players commit to a color or remain flexible, and then they do this matching game. So the first stage is that the agents simultaneously choose to commit to a color or to remain flexible. So that's going to be my pictures for those different strategies. Then once pairs randomly meet, they observe the choices. They observe the commitment or flexibility choice, and then they play the matching colors game. So what happens here? So again, this is now somebody has decided to wear a veil and go to university, for example, or not. So I'm going to be looking here for a perfect Bayesian equilibrium, because of course I want the strategies to match the second play. And there are some, we're going to restrict attention to equilibria which are stable, and players play weakly dominant strategies, which I don't have too much time to get into those kinds of details. But there's going to be stable equilibria and weakly dominant, they're playing weakly dominant strategies. So in the first stage, I'm looking for the commitment strategy, G, R, or flexible for each type and cost. And then I want to know what people are going to do in the second stage, contingent on what they see from their, of this first stage choice. All right, so there's trade-offs. There's going to be clearly trade-offs between being committed to your color and being flexible. And that's going to depend on what people are actually doing in the next stage. So let's get a sense of what those trade-offs will be. So let's think about the trade-offs between a player playing commitment or flexible. And just for discussion here, we're going to consider a green player. So a green player is deciding what to do. Should a green player commit to be green? You might think that's great. I'm going to commit to be green. And then when I show up, people are going to play green. And that would be great if the green player actually meets a flexible player. That flexible player will play green. So the green player, in this case, is happy that they committed to be green. But it's also possible that if a green player commits, the green player could meet a committed red player, in which case they're stuck, right? They don't get any benefits. Now, a green player might decide instead to be flexible. And if the green player is flexible and they meet a red player, they can decide to be red instead. Right? So there's a trade-off between being, if you look at the top, being green and having people accommodate you, that's the very top one, or being flexible and you accommodating other people. And that, of course, is going to depend on how many people have committed to the other color as well, and to your own color. Finally, if the green player is green and the green player meets another flexible player, well, then we have to figure out what happens in this subgame. What happens when two flexible players meet each other? We have to understand that as well. Okay, so then we analyze the full game. We kind of have to flip in our analysis back and forth between the second stage and the first stage to understand what's going on. So again, here's our square, our unit mass of players. The preliminary lemma, of course, if the cost is above B, committing to your own strategy, committing to your own color is a weakly dominant strategy. So the people who have high costs commit to play their own color. If a type commits to the other color, all lower costs do too. Players with other costs do too. And then the flexible dominates commit to own color for low enough costs. So this is our picture. So the equilibrium is characterized by these thresholds here, which are now these commitment thresholds. Okay? So how do we determine those commitment thresholds? Well, we have to think about what's going on in this second stage. So the equilibrium payoffs in the second stage are really straightforward if one player has committed to the other color. So you can just go through this and say, if this player, his incentives to commit, well, we just look at the probability of him meeting all of these different other types, and we can figure out his payoffs. Right? Because either he'll mismatch, or he'll meet a flexible player, but the flexible player will play green. Okay. So the conundrum then is what happens when two flexible players meets. We don't know what's going to happen here when these two players meet each other. And this is a slightly different game than the incomplete information game, because now the players know that when they meet, that this player has chosen to be flexible, right? So there is some inference they can be made about who they are and their types. So let's think about what happens when two flexible players meets. Well, what's happening here is that you're having a game between two flexible players, and their costs are truncated. You've got a truncated cost game, right? You don't have the full range of costs like you did in the incomplete information game. So in particular, no player has a dominant strategy here to play their color. That's the difference between two flexible people meeting and just meeting a random other player in the incomplete information setting. So there are two stable equilibria here. Either all of them play green, and you can see that that's an equilibrium. If two flexible players meet, if everyone plays green, the best response is for you to play green as well, right? Or there's a second equilibrium where everyone plays red. There are two unstable equilibria, but I won't go into those right now. So there are two unstable equilibria. There's two stable equilibria. Either everyone plays green or everyone plays red. Yeah?
We are missing an odd equilibrium.
What?
There should be an odd number of equilibria in all.
We have four.
So there should be...
Five?
Where's the fifth one?
Oh, goodness. I don't...
It's not necessarily generic. It could be
generic, yeah. But then we worry about...
It's kind of generic because the costs are drawn at random.
No, but I mean, if there are some unstable equilibria, they are probably not generic.
Yeah, we have two unstable equilibria and two stable equilibria, and I can talk to you later about where the fifth one might or might not be given the conditions we have on these costs. Okay? All right, so I have a minute. So we have two stable equilibria in the two stable perfect equilibria in the two-stage game. Everyone plays green. So people play green in the flexible subgame, and people commit to red above this cutoff cost CR. And the other one, this CR is a solution to this fixed point. And red players have this advantage to commit because basically they know that these players here are going to play red. So I'm running out of time. The parallel equilibrium is where they play red in the flex subgame, and the commitment is on the green side. So let me quickly go to the who benefits from this. So who's better off or not when commitment is possible? So in the incomplete information game, to remind you, there's a single equilibrium with the tyranny of the majority. In the two-stage game, there's two equilibria where the majority or the minority preferences dominate, and here's what they look like. Relative to the incomplete information game, in this game, with the commitment, all players are better off except the high-cost green players. Because what's going on is when gamma is sufficiently high, this CR goes up, but it's bounded below B. Because these players are going to benefit from committing and having other players accommodate them. Whereas in the world where gamma is very high, that CR goes all the way to B. So you're going to have more people playing red when commitment is possible. So the majority, the majority is outside of their ideal world. People can show who they are, and then they have to deal with it, essentially. The high-cost green majority then has to deal with that situation. In this setting, actually all players are better off, even the high-cost green players. Essentially, these players here are going to accommodate the high-cost greens. So let me just get to the discussion really fast. In the setting where types are unobserved, the high-cost majority is best off, and there's strategic complementarities within the minority. And we can see there could be this conflict between people in the minority. You can have the high-cost people pushing the low-cost people to keep it real. They don't want them accommodating the other people, the majority. On the other hand, when commitment to action is possible, everyone could be better off except for the high-cost majority. And there could be a push from the high-cost majority to not allow people to show up as who they are at work, for example. And overall, in the study of norms, we should be taking types identity into account. We should be considering how people adjust their behavior, possibly to others, and depending on who they meet. And let me just end with this. So what's going on in all of what I've been showing you is there's been this strategic play in anticipation of what people will do and what others will do, and of course you adjust. And again, in reduced form, this sounds exactly like Nash Equilibrium, the way I would teach it to my undergrads. Thanks very much.
We have a few minutes for questions. Rachel, why don't I let you take them?
Sure, who's ever got questions?
I was wondering if there's a chance that your commitment is not observed. Like, I post myself one way on my public profile, but the person I'm about to meet with doesn't go to my public profile. Is the effect kind of monotone in the probability that I'm observed? Or because if nobody ever looks at my profile, I guess it's just the first thing.
Right, so we haven't looked at that. We haven't looked at some chance of your commitment being observed. So you can imagine people have private lives and public lives. So we haven't analyzed that game, though we should. One of the other games that we'd like to analyze is a cheap talk game. So maybe we have this commitment that's free. So we've got various things we want to do with the first stage, and I'm happy to take a list over coffee for what we should be doing. And I could tell you what Tirole does. Tirole has a possibility of hiding your type, but there the motives are very different. In his game, in his paper, what I care about is what you think about me. That's what my preferences are, is I want you to think of me as progressive. So that's what my motives are. And our motives are very different. Eva?
I can suggest another sort of change in some places where you talk about your political standing. I can avoid that topic altogether. So I don't have to have green or red. I can avoid the color, which presumably is a cheaper act than pretending to be the other color.
Right, so I guess it's one of these, the setting that we have is, as we see, we do green and red, and we have these actions, green and red. We could reframe this to be secular versus religious rather than two different religions. So we can think of it being apolitical versus political rather than two different political positions, right? So we can reframe, so for example, at work, it's not so much that you should be progressive. Well, it depends on the university thing I showed you was more progressive versus liberal. But at other workplaces, the idea is you just don't talk politics at work, whatever it might be. And so then, but if you feel very strongly about your politics, then that could be an aversive thing to do, is to not mention politics at all at work when it's a particularly salient thing for you. Same thing about religion. Other questions?
Sure.
So it reminded me, the model reminded me a little bit of the bilingual game, which is a coordination, you take a two-strategy coordination game and add a third strategy, which is a bilingual option, which can coordinate with either of the other two. So flexibility is a little bit like that, isn't it? Usually there's a cost attached to bilingualism.
Right.
But
Right, so we've moved away from that particular, to the idea of, we spent a little time of thinking about whether or not you want to make some sort of investment in order to be able to be flexible. And we decided we wanted to move away from that and just think about, it's symbolic in some sense. You're taking on a symbol. So yes, if to add a particular cost, then it adds a cost to the flexible option, possibly. But we decided not to go that route and just think about this as in symbolic space.
okay, thank you.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thanks.